Ladies and gentlemen, presenting the Professor Greg Dooley and the pundit Steve Clark. Men, take the mic.
That's right, Greg Dooley, Steve Clark. We're presented by Nick Hopwood, president of Peak Wealth Management. You can find more about Nick at peakwm.com. Retire with confidence. On today's program, we'll talk about this week in the NIL. Caleb Love. Now, this has happened 2 years in a row now to Michigan basketball. Why is this happening?
We're back, and to any non-believers, no, we're serious. We're doing this. We're doing it all the way up and through football season, having a blast. By the way, thank you for the people that rated. We've got some reviews now, our podcast, and it's all been great feedback. We've avoided the haters so far, I think.
So far. We haven't had any Michigan State, Ohio State trolls yet. And do we welcome that at this point? Is that a sign of success? Is that like a moment of arrival?
Yes and no, and I was telling you, I've never really had that with mvictors.com because I write about history, and where are you going to hate on, on history that much, right? So I've avoided that in my kind of career, Steve. You've probably felt a little bit of that, though.
Not too bad. I'm not that entirely successful, but what I do is I try to be fair, but I also try to be somewhat entertaining, and the occasional Ohio State, Michigan State jab is good for a snicker, but it's nothing totally deep-seated.
And I think we've talked about maybe getting into the nature of rivalry from a respectful, honest place, kind of looking at both sides of how teams feel about us, not just Michigan State and Ohio State, but also the Iowas, the Illinois, the Wisconsins, right? And their fan bases, and kind of from an honest perspective, because we're far from perfect as Michigan fans. And I think it'd be a cool topic, but maybe later.
We're going to start with the ACC and how this might affect the Big Ten. And just to set things up, if you haven't heard, the Florida State athletic director has gone very public about his dissatisfaction with the money supply that's coming to Florida State and the ACC teams. They know the Big Ten and SEC media contracts are just dwarfing what the ACC contract is. The ACC contract goes through 2036, so that's a long, long time to be at the bottom. And quite frankly, the guy at Florida State, Michael Alford, has basically said, look, enough already. You've got to do something, Jim Phillips, the commissioner of the ACC, to get us more money, because being down by $30 million is not acceptable. Having less money than the University of Central Florida when they joined the Big 12, they're getting their new media rights deal at some point, is not acceptable. And gone as far as to say Florida State, a team that hasn't done anything in the last 5 years, is more worthy than other schools in the ACC. We should get a bigger share. And to me, the first thing when I saw that, Greg, is this is how the demise of the Big 12 started. When Texas wanted to get more money and a bigger share than the rest of the Big 12, and was okay with Oklahoma getting a bigger share as well, but we certainly deserve more than Iowa State. We certainly deserve more than Kansas State, other schools in the Big 12. This started the end of the Big 12. But this is why the Big 12 is in flux. This is why Texas and Oklahoma eventually went to the SEC to get paid more. Why hasn't that happened with the Big Ten? Why hasn't Michigan or Ohio State come up with that same frame of mind as the two dominant schools in the Big Ten? Sorry, Penn State. Sorry, Nebraska. Why haven't they gone that route, and why is the Big Ten so stable?
Well, I don't know if I have an answer to that, but I can say it's always been that way. There's never been really a break in that foundation and solidarity amongst the teams about sharing what they can share, where absolutely Ohio State could say we deserve more. Certainly not yet. I have a lot of thoughts on this, and it's interesting that the ACC probably wisely has a special clause in their contract, which even if you leave and buy out, right now as it stands, the ACC retains rights to the coverage of your home games, even if you leave and somehow wiggle out of this contract. That's what's really holding up the ACC. I brought this up in my class this week, by the way, this very story. And I challenge people not, what do you do if you're Florida State? The question was, what do you do? Yes, if you're the commissioner, but also if you're Boston College, what do you do here? Because to your point too about like the Big Ten and the other people, the pundits and the beat writers for these schools are hovering over like vultures, looking at the pieces of meat on the ground, and we're stroking our beards and going, North Carolina might be a good fit in the Big Ten. And I don't know about Florida State, but what about Virginia? They're an AAU. They're an accredited university. That fits with our brand. But, we don't maybe need Virginia so much because we already have Maryland in that part of the country and that demographic. So yeah, it's pretty interesting. But they're not Pac-10 hurting yet, but they're getting close.
The grant of rights stuff seems to be so ironclad. The buyout is absolutely huge. The avenue that is being explored is that if I can get enough support, get a majority of the teams in the conference to say we want out, could it actually get rid of the contract? Could they form their own conference? Again, we're not lawyers, but this is the avenues that are being explored. I think you're quite right about the media trying to, like buzzards, trying to find something that can create chaos. Because, quite frankly, I think Alford is basically just trying to say, Jim Phillips, let's do something to work it out. Let's work together so that we can figure out new ways to explore that $30 million per year gap that we can work with. And I think whenever you're a businessman, when you're in a partnership with somebody, you expect things to work out, and you work and you sacrifice and you have an optimist point of view of things working out. But deep in your mind, you have to play the what if scenario. If this doesn't work out, what are my options?
Yeah.
And Florida State wants to say, let's work this out. I think that's where their mindset is. But the media is looking over, well, what are the other options? And how could this disintegrate? When you start off with your argument saying, I think our university should have a bigger cut than other schools in the ACC, and then try to convince other schools in the ACC to join them in that battle, that's a very interesting sell that I don't see working. But there is talk about a number of schools that are saying, hey, we will join you in this fight. And I think the fight is we are in solidarity that we want to see something work out because all our schools are about $30 million behind the eight ball.
And my question would be let's look at UCLA. Did they have a version of what you're describing behind the scenes before they jetted with USC to the Big Ten, right? Because the result was they left. Texas and Oklahoma, we know they did, and Texas had its own TV network and all this stuff, right? But to what extent did UCLA do that? And the fact is they have seen teams get up and leave, even a team firmly on the West Coast of the United States. So they see that and they wonder, they're probably quaking in their boots. But I love let's the three or four of us get together and have a bigger share. Well, meanwhile, Leon is getting larger, right? The share of what the other teams are getting who are outside of that keeps shrinking as more teams join this mini collective. I do have one historical point that understand that this kind of thing has been going on forever. And a version of this is one of the reasons that the NCAA's firm grip, on the TV money in college football, but really their control was broken. Because in a nutshell, when the NCAA originally controlled all the TV rights, they put the bid out, ABC and CBS, for instance, paid for the bid in 1981. Well, a group of schools before that didn't like the way the NCAA was running it and formed something called the CFA, which some of you might remember. Doesn't really exist anymore. The Big Ten, by the way, held to their guns and stuck with the NCAA and didn't join the CFA. The CFA went out quietly and negotiated its own contract with NBC for $180 million in 1981, announced it, and the NCAA was furious, okay? Lawsuits resulted. The big one came out of the state of Oklahoma, and the NCAA ruled, like they did recently on the Alston NIL case, not unanimously, but overwhelmingly. And they called the NCAA what it was, the C word, a cartel. So diamonds, drug lords, OPEC, NCAA, cartels. They control the supply, They dictate the price, and they try to punish anyone who doesn't follow the rules. And that allowed all of the conferences and teams like Notre Dame to go out and negotiate their own contracts. And is a big reason why we're here today was a few teams, more than a few at the time, getting together and effectively organizing and saying, enough, this isn't working the way we want it to do. We're leaving money on the table. We want our own path.
So USC wanted their own path, and USC wanted UCLA to join them. UCLA worked out for them in their mind because they're hemorrhaging money. It was an athletic department that was really, really struggling to find the way to pay their bills. And it said, look, we can join the Big Ten and improve our financial situation and still keep USC as our deepest rival. Sure, they went along with it.
Yeah.
Now, that wasn't an easy process because UCLA is a part of the California university system. Governor Grant Newsom didn't want them to leave.
Yeah, but
sure.
I guarantee you what happened is they went behind closed doors when the other state schools and the politicians griped, and they said, you want us to be around as a athletic program? You like having UCLA in the state, and is it important? And everyone kind of said, yeah. And then tell us where we're going to make up this gap, because this is where we're going to make it up. And USC, of course, is a private school and has more flexibility there. And they quietly settled, basically. UCLA rather has to pay back into the state fund a pretty substantial amount of money, but not substantial enough to change the deal. And they quietly said, okay, we'll see you later. We get it. And that's what happened behind the doors.
And as far as Big Ten expansion goes, before we wrap up this topic, they're going to have 16 teams. And it's like, well, if you go beyond that, I mean, it doesn't seem to stop at 18. I'm not sure it stops at 20. Seeing the history of how what Big Ten doesn't expand, I mean, they started off with getting a great program at Penn State, got a great program with Nebraska. But after that, it's been a lot about market size. The Maryland, D.C. area, Washington, D.C., Rutgers is a part of the New York area, Los Angeles, the number 2 market. They have USC and UCLA. A lot of this is about markets. So does Tallahassee fit into the mold of great football program, or does it go into the great market size? And market size down south would be Atlanta. And who's out of Atlanta? Well, Georgia Tech's out of Atlanta, but Georgia Tech is not a football or a basketball program. They're more of the Rutgers, Nebraska variety in that particular case. So I'm really interested to see how that goes down the road, but I'm not exactly super anxious for Big Ten global domination or things like that. There are some things that are just not a good fit, and Southern football and Big Ten football doesn't seem to be a great cultural fit. And then the other devil on my shoulder has always said, eat or be eaten.
Yeah.
Who's eating? The SEC and the Big Ten are eating. Who's being eaten? The Big 12, the Pac-12, and right now the ACC is about ready to start a game of musical chairs thanks to the Florida State Athletic Director.
Yeah, and then the question is, well, what, if we're really getting cynical here, what happens to the TV contract if when the Big Ten consumes a few more teams in the SEC, and we're at 20 teams for the SEC, 20 for the Big Ten or whatever, does the TV contract be adjusted, renegotiated, whatever? Do the teams that are coming in get a full share right away, like we talked about, I think, last week? Right now, teams new to the Big Ten have been phased in over many years to get that full share of their cut of the revenue. I will say, though, that everyone knows the TV money is real. Well, how real? Like right now, about half of the Michigan athletic budget is made up of ticket sales plus those required donations, or PSC, that you're required to pay when you buy tickets for the Michigan Stadium everywhere and then other places at hockey and basketball. Half of our budget is made up of that. Well, when the new TV deal kicks in, the TV money and the money from the conferences, the Big Ten Conference, will equal or possibly even exceed the ticket and required donation money at Michigan. Combine that across all the athletic departments, suddenly the most powerful revenue source for all the schools will be those conference distributions. And right now we're still taking direction from a limp NCAA, and there's state laws and things like that on policy and guidelines and what's permissible. I wonder if we're not going to see a repeat of some version of like the CFA, where the conferences go, now we're calling the shots. We're creating our own organization. By the way, some people are confused by this, but the playoff itself is an LLC. It's its own organization. It's not the NCAA. So the playoff, the CFP, is a group that, like a mini conference, made up of representatives of certain teams on its board, but has a president and distributes the money back to the schools based on participation. And in the Big Ten's case, we share all that money too. So if Ohio State, Penn State, Michigan State make the playoff, we get a certain amount depending on which games the teams play in, and that's distributed equally amongst all the conference members. But it's its own thing. It's not the NCAA, which I think some people get confused about.
Well, Greg, we grew up in a generation where the NCAA is a cartel. And it just seems like in the last few years, it's gone from cartel to your appendix or your tonsils. Things that part of the human body that you may not necessarily need and could potentially remove if it becomes a problem or desired.
Pretty much.
The one thing that we will also agree on, what's best for football will change the dynamic of what schools migrate and go. So you think the best rivalry in football is Michigan-Ohio State. The best rivalry in basketball is Duke-North Carolina. But if the ACC somehow splinters off, the Duke-North Carolina rivalry has no impact. It has no weight because football rules.
Yeah, and also I think that might be the thing that forces those rivalries and relationships might finally be the thing that forces Notre Dame's hand to go, wait a minute, we got to do something here. As opposed to just lingering on the outside as an independent.
The NCAA and the playoff committee could have forced Notre Dame to join a conference.
People don't understand this. They can't get a bye in the current playoff format, and they're okay with that. So if they're the number one team in the country, the committee says they're the number one team in the country. They're at best a fifth seed in the new playoff format. But what do they get? They get that home game. I don't think they mind. And they keep all the money so that they have the potential to play more games, receive more money for A, a home game, and B, throughout the playoff, which goes straight into the Notre Dame's coffers because they don't share it with anybody.
You go back to USC and UCLA joining the Big Ten, and Oklahoma, this is after the heels of Oklahoma and Texas joined the SEC. Literally, people thought that Notre Dame was standing at the cliff's edge saying, decide. Jump off the cliff and maybe be irrelevant in the discussion of college football or join a conference and make sure that you have a home. And when they came up with the 12-team playoff format, Notre Dame got the best of everything. They're allowed to keep their semi-quasi affiliation with the ACC. It's a 12-team format, not 4. So, hey, Notre Dame just has to be in the top 12 to get it. If the NCAA or other member institutions wanted Notre Dame to join a conference, just join a conference. We don't care who anymore. We'd like it to be ours. But if it's not, just join a conference. They let them off the hook.
They did. And by the way, the Rose Bowl tried to dig its heels in on a few provisions to protect the sanctity of the timing of the Rose Bowl and its place in the playoff, and was the last domino to drop. And I mention that because the Rose Bowl is a legacy thing. In fact, Michigan played in the first Rose Bowl in 1902. And they're a legacy that tried to hold out because of their name and their brand, and they lost. So you're right that the pressure of the CFP could have weighed on Notre Dame. I will add one more thing about Notre Dame, too. If my scenario plays out, though, where Notre Dame's number one and they're undefeated and clearly would have gotten a bye under normal circumstances in the system, while maybe today they don't mind the notion of playing that first game at home, their fans will flip out. Because their path to a national championship will be a little harder because maybe they can comfortably win that first game, but it'll be a tough game. It's roughly a top 10 team. Then they will have to enter the next round where the team they're playing has already gotten a bye and has rested for that time period. Their fans will flip out.
And they'll play number 4. I haven't thought of this.
Yeah.
I thought of the first part of it, never being able to get a bye. But getting the home game, they'll be happy with that. But the next round.
Under this scenario.
Where
they're firmly the 5th seed.
Right.
Yeah.
So teams banged up because they played a hard-fought game against the number 12 team. Let's just say Notre Dame's the clear-cut number 1. But
seeded number 5.
Right.
Yeah.
And if they don't reseed, and I'm not aware of any attempts about reseeding the teams based on how they played the week before.
They can't do that because they need people to see where we might be in order to make temporary arrangements. You know what I mean? For the next game.
Right.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so 5's got to play 4.
Yeah.
And then what? If they win that one, then they got to play 1.
Yeah.
Right?
Right. That's right.
As long as 1 beat 8, the winner of 4 versus 5 plays 1.
Right.
So Notre Dame would go into a path of, we got to play an extra game, get banged up. Then we're playing a 4 when we should have played the 8.
Yep.
And then we get rewarded by playing the 1, which should have been the 2.
Some person with Notre Dame sympathies is listening to this and just
Oh, no, you've
out.
Unlocked something that I'm actually happy about.
Good.
I like the idea of Notre Dame fan feeling like they're being screwed.
Yeah.
I enjoy
flip out.
I enjoy that piece of relevance that just entered my mind.
No, you've added another layer completely to it, which is absolutely true. So once they sum total the math on their situation, they're going to flip out. Right. Because the 2 and 3 would be theoretically on the other side, so they would have to play the 1. Before they reach
which
the final.
In their mind should have been the 2, and it would be the championship game,
right?
Not the semifinal game.
Yeah.
Oh, I like this.
Yeah.
I'm finally finding a reason.
We'll see if something happens here.
Be happy about Notre Dame and their misery.
There you go.
'Cause I'm sick of the special treatment. I give them props for who they are, what they've accomplished. I don't necessarily feel the need that it needs to carry over in today's college football.
Well, and here's my personal feelings about Notre Dame. I really like playing Notre Dame. And, Steve, we grew up in a time when that rivalry, it rivaled, it was right up there with what was going on with us with Ohio State and Michigan State, particularly because of the quality of the games. It was ridiculous. Yeah. And it's true. Michigan literally taught Notre Dame how to play football in 1887. Literally traveled there. Here are the rules. Practice a little bit. Actually put a couple of our guys on their team and played a game, right? And then there's all kinds of history back and forth that my buddy John Crick outlined in Natural Enemies, his great book, right? But I love playing them because I remember even when we were in the dumps, right? After we lost to Appalachian State in Oregon, correct me if I'm wrong, but the third game pitted 0-2 Michigan versus 0-2 Notre Dame. And I always remember how big that game was for the rest of the season. So I like to play them. I'm selfish that way. It's very convenient to go down there. I love their campus. And like many of us, we have mutual friends with Notre Dame ties. So I like it. If it means us playing Notre Dame more, I'm in it. That said, to see them twist and turn a little bit every once in a while is also fun.
You talk about the rivalry with Michigan, Ohio State, and Notre Dame at a time. Think about in the late 80s, early 90s, where Michigan beat Ohio State in 88, 89, 90, 91, tied in 92, beat them in 93.
Undefeated. Okay. I love that little historical element that we were undefeated. Is it 92 where we were 9-0-3?
Right.
Yeah.
So Michigan and Ohio State, this is opposite of what most people growing up now see Ohio State versus Michigan. You know, Ohio State dominating for 15, 16 years. And Ohio State was turning their attention to the Alabamas of the world and the Oklahomas of the world, and because they're gunning for national championships. Michigan was gunning for national championships too, but they were playing Notre Dame to start off the season.
Yeah.
And this was top 5 versus top 5, and the loser of that game didn't fall very far in the rankings and could work their way back up. It was never necessarily a killer to them playing for a national championship.
Like I asked my students, who are Michigan's rivals, rank them. And Notre Dame today was considered an afterthought for obvious reasons. We kind of disengaged with them and everything like that. Everyone had fun at those games, but the night games, but no, you're right. And the games were epic, which was a part of it. The games with Notre Dame were epic. And some of the greatest moments of that entire period and arguably Michigan history happened in that rivalry.
Usually it was played the first game of the year, no warm-ups, and then both teams started throwing warm-up games in preparation. one of the schools would not have that warm-up game while the other school did, and they cried foul and unfair.
Yeah, Bo argued there was some kind of gentleman's agreement that they wouldn't schedule another team before, and I think both teams blame the other for screwing that up or whatever. It's one of those little subplots. I will say this: you mentioned that notion of playing that big game and losing it and having your ability to creep back into relevance, which happened, but the chance for a national championship was difficult, right? Where one of those nice outcomes that could come from an expanded playoff of 12 teams is you can lose that game. You can lose that conference game. You can lose one game and get into the playoff as it was, but it was tough, right? Did that ever happen in the four-team playoff?
Greg, no team with 2 or more losses have ever been selected.
But you could see 2 lost teams getting in now into the 12-team playoff. If you look at the top 12 final rankings by the committee, there are 2 lost teams in there. I'm curious to see how many 3 lost teams are in there. I doubt it, but there's probably a few in the top 12 of the final CFP rankings. So you can recover and weasel your way into that tournament and have a shot.
Greg, it's halftime on The Professor and the Pundit, and with the debt ceiling talks in Washington reaching its peak, it's time to hear from our title sponsor of this program, Peak Wealth Management.
Hey, it's Nick Hopwood, CFP from Peak Wealth Management. You probably went to Michigan, and you're probably super smart and successful. But don't reinvent the wheel when it comes to your finances. Work with someone who sponsors the content you love, someone who shares a common interest, a fiduciary. Work with a team of CFPs, the team. Learn more about my team at peakwm.com. Retire with confidence.
And Nick, once again, thank you for being the title sponsor here of The Professor and the Pundit. You can learn more at peakwm.com. Greg, at the beginning of the show, we were mentioning Caleb Love. A highly decorated transfer guy was going to come in and take some of the sting away from losing Hunter Dickinson, Kobe Bufkin, and Jed Howard. He is not going to be going to Michigan, and it's not because he saw this as a abandoned ship. It had to do with admissions and not having his classes transferred over the way you would have expected. This is the second year in a row where this curveball has happened. Terrence Shannon Jr. from out in the Big 12 was supposed to be at Michigan. Instead, he goes to Illinois, lights the Wolverines up as a member of the Fighting Illini. 2 years in a row now. What's going on?
Well, number one, how invested am I supposed to get in these guys who are trying to get into school here and transfer? And I get maybe he would have been a really important piece, and he was probably for our basketball program. But I get texts, Twitter absolutely explodes with all the memes and what are we doing? And look, I wish the kid luck. I'm sorry it didn't work out, but I'm not getting overly emotional about losing this young man.
I do get concerned about this because it gives us an impression that when you announce a guy is coming here and the players announce he's coming here and then all of a sudden go, well, I guess he's not coming here. It sounds like people aren't prepared and don't have their stuff together.
Okay.
And I think that's why people are emotional over it.
Okay. That's a concern, is the messaging, the vetting. So something happened. And by the way, Ira and Sam in the morning show have speculated on some of the nuance that was supposed to happen, as in, I think the plan was he was supposed to graduate and then come in as a transfer, which effectively gives you a clean slate, right? If you have a degree from North Carolina, you are now transferring as a grad transfer, and the rules are different because you already have your degree, a good degree, from an accredited university, and now the question is what classes are you going to take while you're here at Michigan? Which is different. You're right. So the mechanics of the whole thing is frustrating. But I think some people see, no, this is just Michigan being jerks. Brian Cook on Thursday from Mengo Blog used a different phrase. Michigan's just resistant. Now, let's talk about the admissions department. This is not Tuscaloosa, Alabama. No offense. This is not Clemson, South Carolina, where everyone in the town, like from the fry cook to the preacher to the school president to the professors to the admissions people, are on board with the football program. And on board, you know what I mean? Like, roll tide, okay? That's not this place. I think people understand that, but that's not Ann Arbor. That's not this culture. In fact, if you look at our university budget, I'm talking University of Michigan proper, including all the campuses, the hospital networks now. We acquired Sparrow Hospital Network. It's $12 billion, roughly. That's what the budget's going to be. The revenues, because we spend most of it. It's not like it's a profit center. Of that, around $200 million is athletics. It's less than 2%. Okay, there's the money. That's one thing. And yes, I think people understand there's a greater significance to athletics, not only for all the students and the athletes and the people associated with the university, but also fundraising for the hospital and all the great things that athletics do. Okay, so I think there's that understanding. But everyone is not lockstep on board with behind the scenes and all the corridors here at Michigan with helping athletics and fixing athletics for many things for good reason. So no, we don't have an admissions coordinator picking up the phone at 11 p.m. to look at an application for someone who's trying to transfer. Right or wrong, Steve, it doesn't exist, okay? The admissions department handles what? A couple 100,000 applications for undergrad and grad school each year, okay? They're not set up to handle 25 special cases this time of year and do it. They're just not today. And by the way, it didn't help that we had President Schlissel, that at best, he didn't have a huge focus on athletics, and at worst, was deliberately not picking up the phone or not answering questions when asked by supporters, regents, things like that.
And people knew that when he was first hired at the U of M. And I remember there was a lot of people who supported that.
But that's this place. So I joked while we were coming in, I went to a concert at Michigan Theater, okay? There was a guy sitting next to me wearing a Spartan jacket. I said hi. I didn't know who he was. He said, well, people are going to talk about us because I had my Michigan hat on. No, they're not. No one cares, especially in the Michigan Theater, okay? It's not that big a deal. Outside of this world, now people who are listening to this or are on message boards, we're a very, very small subclass of the culture here at the University of Michigan, is my point. Okay, so enter President Ono. Happen to get to know President Ono a little bit. He spoke in my class. By the way, I am honored. It was the first guest lecture that he gave here at the University of Michigan. He came into the history of college athletics and talked about everything from the role of the president to the relationship with athletics and the importance and the significance, his experience at big schools like Cincinnati, and all that stuff. He talked about it. Okay, first of all, he showed up for a class called the History of College Athletics. Second, he talked about all these things. And it's clear, look at his Twitter account. The first thing he did, I think, was follow Michigan athletics. I think the second or third was the actual main Michigan UMich Twitter account. Then it's Jim Harbaugh. Then it's, Michigan football or something. And so he clearly cares. Now, I think people are like, oh, Ono's going to put on a cape and fly down a State Street and fix everything. And I think they were encouraged because he clearly got involved in Jim Harbaugh's contract situation. In fact, was the one who announced it, right? I wouldn't expect Ono to do all the things that you think he's going to do and tweet out next week that, hey, I just want to let everyone know a little update. I fixed the admissions process now. Hey, Caleb, we'll give it another look. That's not happening. But what he will do is listen. And what he will do and what he's great at is bringing people together and bring the right people together. And by the way, he has the support in general of the regents to do that, to make good decisions, to adjust as this landscape of college athletics evolves. And by the way, to not ignore it, which is kind of what I think was happening before. So you have that, okay? But he's not changing the culture of this place, okay? It will require some changes. And listen, I know that some coaches are frustrated with the admissions process in general. It's not so much the credit to credit transfer problem that a lot of people talk about, like your geology class at Nebraska, that doesn't meet our requirements for a geology class at Michigan, therefore no soup for you. No, it's the frustration, I think, with a lot of the coaches is that as the NCAA and the college athletics world has evolved and the transfer portal and NIL have come into play, where thousands, I heard, of athletes were in the transfer portal. The windows for the transfer portal vary by sport. Softball is still playing right now. So athletes who might be on those teams, their window to enter the transfer portal hasn't even arrived yet, right? Baseball's the same way. So what happens when those players come into the portal and they have the same problem or same question that Caleb Love? There isn't a machine in place at Michigan to go, oh, we'll turn the lights back on in the admissions department and engage on these special cases, coach, that you have that are athletes looking to see if Michigan's an option for them to play third base for the softball team. My understanding, and I don't know our admissions department, but something probably needs to be adjusted or done right there. The admissions department has a huge job, and I'll put it in a good word, and maybe a Clark or a Dooley will be applying for school there, so we better be nice. I don't know. But it's not their fault. It's our culture. It's our priority. It's our focus from the top down, from the president on down, has not been on accommodating special cases. Yes, there are conversations and rules and exceptions that are made from time to time, but not to the extent that goes on in other schools. And by the way, if you want to get something done, you talked about business earlier, it still comes down to picking up the phone and a coach with a big name maybe calling a dean or somebody like that and going, hey, can you look at this? But I don't hear or see of any funny business. It's more about the mechanics of the whole thing, how it works, how it's accommodated, which kind of gets us into NIL and a lot of frustrations people have about NIL.
I understand why it may be a problem, but it should be rectified and probably should have been done previously. To have two players like that, it seems kind of embarrassing to say a player is going here and then a few months later find out, no, he's not going here. And because of that, people see that on the surface as something that they're not prepared for. And Juwan Howard's depending on some of these transfers in to make his team competitive. And if he's getting handcuffed because, oh, well, it just is the way it is here, it's a knock on whether you feel like you have support or want to stick around. It just makes it a little bit harder. You start finding the more cons than pluses.
Right. But here's the bright side. Okay. So coaches in general were pretty quiet about NIL and stuff like that for a while. Juwan is one of the ones who spoke out and basically said we need to do more. Now we have this. Okay. He's not going to sit back quietly. So phone calls, I'm sure, are being made. Discussions are being had. How can we do better? How can we fix this? And maybe a decision's made that we're not doing anything about it, but it won't be ignored now.
So meanwhile, they thought they had Caleb Love. They stopped recruiting players for that position in the transfer portal, and now they've got to restart. Meanwhile, they may have lost some other potential players that could have fit because in that period of time, they found their second home already.
The same frustrations, though, that fans have with this admissions snafu with Caleb Love, it echoes a lot of the sentiments and the frustration people have with NIL right now. Because one of the things you always hear is, we're behind or we should be doing more. Well, what does that mean? Behind what? Okay, money? Okay, yeah. Should be doing more? That's different. Okay, yeah. You mean giving more money to athletes? Is that? No, it's beyond that. And under the covers, it is beyond that because you look at Clemson and you go to ClemsonTigers.com. You open up their website, right? And splashed right on there is something called their REIGN, REIGN. And that is their single focus, steely-eyed, narrow, collaborative relationship between the athletic department, the university, and NIL. And this is what you should do. Go here, give the money, and you'll support Clemson athletics, all our teams. And it has different variations of how you can support, but they're in lockstep. Back to my whole what's going on in Tuscaloosa. This is the kind of thing that's going on where everyone's in lockstep. So, in a nutshell, why aren't we in lockstep? Part of the reason is we weren't doing this before. So we weren't doing this behind closed doors or in churches or with casino chips or at car dealerships or houses for uncles and aunts. We weren't doing it, okay? So the machine was already in place at places like Georgia and Clemson. Let's just assume that, okay? I think it's a fair assumption, right? So, yeah, out of the gate, there's some awkwardness, right? We've got these different collectives. By the way, I had Jared Wangler, former football player, son of Johnny Wangler, Bo's quarterback in the 70s, in to talk about his collectives. He runs a couple organizations. One's called Champion Circle. Wangler's group was behind the One More Year Fund, which funded effectively incentives for Blake Corum, Trevor Keegan, and others to come back for one more year.
That, to me, has been huge.
Yeah.
Because that has allowed some of those Michigan players that could change the fortunes for this upcoming season in 2023. Michigan's now a favorite to win the Big Ten over Ohio State in some circles, in part because Blake Corum is coming back and members of that offensive line is coming back.
Yeah, and that kind of gets to, if there's two main purposes of these collectives, it's to, A, keep maybe those people who are on the fence, to provide them additional assistance, help to stay. Okay. Well, then the other side of it is, in reality, it is illegal to provide direct inducements for recruits to say, come to Michigan. You can't say, if you come here, here's the money, or here's the money, come here, right? You can't do that. But when they're here, the flexibility opens up for what you can offer. Okay. Oh, and by the way, the other group that Jared runs is called Valiant Management, which acts more like, which is another thing that collectives do, like an agency, right? An agent, like Ari Gold. So pairing deals with organizations, companies, services, and athletes, getting them paid for their endorsement and things like that. And by the way, they work together. At some schools, the collective will raise some money. You'll have an agent arrange a deal with, say, an auto dealership, and maybe the auto dealer wants to pay $1,000 for an appearance to promote a car. Well, the collective can toss in another $1,000 for the athlete and amplify the deal and make it sweeter. And everyone's happy, right? The fans and the collective supported the athlete. The auto dealership got their promotion and even an incentive, and the athlete ended up with compensation. The other side of it is, how do we attract people that are considering Michigan to get here? What Michigan won't do is say, come to Michigan, we're going to pay you a lot of money. But what Michigan wants to say is, come to Michigan, and we've got lots of people doing really well. Look around, call JJ. The other thing they want to do is through my other guest, which is a guy named Chin Wirapuli. And he's a Ross grad. He has 10 years in consulting, roughly. And he was an assistant. He supported Jim Harbaugh on his staff, right, as part of his education here at Michigan. So Chin, with some help of some others, set up this thing called Hail Impact, and it just was announced. And what this is designed to be a charitable 501c3, for people who understand tax law, organization or program that provides the opportunity for athletes to earn money while they're here. Up to $40,000 is the goal. What they want to do is raise $5 million, and people can support this, donate to it, and the goal is to provide basically a stipend to everyone, say, on a given team, if they complete some charity work, roughly speaking, 24 hours of charity work for approved charities. Number 2, take some educational courses, like on investing. Maybe we should get Nick involved, like on leadership, on tax law and things like that. They have to take some required courses and then submit a summary of their experience. If they do those things and they meet those thresholds, they effectively earn this stipend, okay? But some people out there are going, okay, what's in it for the donors? Well, assuming they get their 501c3 status, that would enable big donors to get a tax deduction for their donation, all right? But all this is legislated. The 501c3 status is all legislated by the federal government through the IRS. And they're the ones who've got to approve the charity. And they're the ones who will be the watchdogs to say, did you meet the thresholds of being a charity? By the way, a big chunk of the money doesn't go to the players. A small amount goes to overhead, to Hail Impact, but 20% of all the donations go directly to support the charities, like the Humane Society of Ann Arbor, I believe, is one of their charities they have signed up. So that's how it works. So you can't just say, hey, I'm a charitable collective. Somebody donates $1 million. They get a tax deduction, and whatever's left goes directly, say, to J.J. McCarthy. You can't do that. That doesn't meet the standards of a charitable organization. That, A, wouldn't be approved. B, if audited, would be shut down. And C, could get the donor in trouble if they claimed it, if they didn't have 501c status. So it's not that easy. But that's how the charitable sides of a lot of these organizations work.
And that's not just in Michigan, that's everywhere in the country?
So Ohio State has something called the Cohesion Foundation or Cohesion Club, I think they call it. And I believe that's a similar program where the athletes do charitable work and can earn this stipend or cash. Peanut butter spread, I assume, across the team. It's not required. It has nothing to do with performance on the field. So the 85th scholarship, however you determine that, can earn as much as Blake Corum in doing these tasks if the program is set up. And I'll end with this. None of our collectives, to the frustration of fans, seemingly, at least at this point, are very well funded, okay? But they're gaining traction. And from what I hear, you may see some of the coaches and prominent coaches start to get more involved in trying to rally support, let's just call it that, for Hail Impact through talking to some people around the country. Put it this way, I wouldn't be surprised if you see some of that now that we're in this kind of off months of June and July, and you'll see them get traction. I'll tell you the one thing that a lot of people want to see, though, is eventually Michigan being more like a Clemson in the sense that everyone's unified and behind one collective or organization like their REIN thing. So, but that would require either these different groups that are out there, and there's more than just the ones I mentioned, Jamie Morris's Stadium in Maine. There's a couple more out there that Ward kind of quasi-endorsed. I think something would have to happen where they come together and either say, Ward, we got together and we're a united front named this, right? And we'd like your endorsement.
And that's, I think, always been a big issue everywhere. It's Game of Thrones for the collectives trying to figure out to get final approval and endorsement.
Except a lot of the schools that we're probably in competition with a lot of athletes for are united.
And who figured this out a long time ago?
I think Clemson. I believe
Okay.
Texas started out with a couple collectives, and now they're united behind one. And I assume it's a moving target, but I had to check Alabama. I'm guessing Alabama has a pretty united front in this area. Georgia, right? But I think that was born out of experience, experience of paying players and doing it illegally, and suddenly they're really good at it when the lights turned on and now you can do it. I think they were coordinated, and they have, I don't know, people with a lot of experience and probably the local law firm and things like that advising and helping, and it happened real quickly. We started with a greenfield, and when you start with an open slate, this is how it works in any business, right? You get some people pop up, say, hey, I think we can do this. I have some ideas. Let's try it. And that's the mode we're in. And that reality is part due to the culture here where we're not interested in cheating. We're not necessarily interested in having a recruit a bag of money in the first place, or even now. So, yeah, there are going to be some growing pains and some time's going to be involved here. Like I tell people, look at the Michigan Stadium renovation. It was probably long overdue, okay? People were frustrated by the pace. But we act late, we react late, but we tend to do the right thing eventually, right? We tend to get it together. And more recently, Michigan has probably benefited for not necessarily being the one to be quick react, but it's starting to show cracks. It's starting to show frustration. I think a lot of people, while baseball isn't a big sport here, are frustrated that we talked about Clemson, that Mr. Eric Bakich, who people just say the greatest things about this guy, what he did here, that we lost him to Clemson, right? So people are getting frustrated, Steve, and I get it. I don't have all the answers, but I can explain why some of the things are based on history and based on my understanding and based on conversations with pretty powerful people around here, which I've had the fortune to do through some of the teaching that I've done at Michigan.
So nowadays, we don't need Odell Beckham Jr. to actually give a guy a cash payout on the field after the national championship game anymore.
Absolutely not. No, well, you don't. No. It's funny. People assume like that the NCAA guidelines or the state laws are real restrictive. They're actually pretty loose in that you would be surprised how involved the Michigan athletic department, if it really wanted, could get involved. the restrictions are things like Jawan can't fund the collective or pay the player, or we can't have an official on the athletics staff be an agent, and you can't facilitate directly signing contracts. You can't obviously induce players to come to Michigan, right? It's more about those are the things that, as the NCAA says, are impermissible, right? But after that, you have a lot of latitude as far as, Steve, creating a marketing department. Clemson has this, like has a room of marketing where they have all the imagery, right? You can walk in there, probably talked about it already, but they can actually advise and support branding, marketing strategy. The athletic department can retweet tweets about deals and things like that. They can directly support them. In that case, as long as that service is available to any student, you can do it, okay? So, but guess what? The athletic department has enough stuff on its plate right now. I don't know that, again, getting back to the culture of Michigan, the athletic department's going to start knocking down walls, hiring staff with benefits to support NIL marketing for athletes and legal consultation. And by the way, athletes and the rest of the student body. I don't think it's happening, okay? It's just not the culture here. And I think fans are going to be frustrated by that. I think it's happening at schools like Clemson.
All right, you've been listening to The Professor and the Pundit with Greg Dooley and Steve Clark. Thanks for joining us. I want to remind people, listen, rate, and review, and share. Follow all the episodes you can. Professor and the Pundit is available wherever you get your favorite podcast.
I even asked Alexa to play The Professor and the Pundit, and it started right up. The latest episode. Yeah.
Awesome. Great job, Greg. We will drop another episode next Wednesday, but until then, remember, Michigan football is back-to-back Big Ten champs and are winners over Ohio State and Michigan State. Go Blue.
Go Blue.